of background. Me and Marco had worked on a deck before, but I've also been a massive admirer of Marco's work. Back on Twitter, he was one of the first, I think you were the first one to do 30 days of insights. You were the first one, weren't you, Marco?
I think so, yeah.
You were, and multiple people have kind of taken that idea since then. Such a great idea.
Done it better than me.
No, you were the best. Started with the best, so it was good. And I remember just seeing that, and I was just like, there's like a lot of bravery with putting yourself out there like that. So I appreciated it. I told a lot of people, this is what you got to do when they're starting out in the industry. So thanks so much for doing that. And then Jessie, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Hey, so, okay, guys, I think we'll start. I'll hand over to Marco. We've got some exercises we'll go through, and it should be a fun kind of hour. So, yeah, Marco, let me hand over to you.
Absolutely. So just quick intro to myself. I'm Marco. I'm a strategist at Epoch in Bristol in the UK. And this is not my regular skin color. I have a pink light on. And I have a lot of plants. They're all legal though, don't worry. But yeah, nice little pink light on a gloomy little UK morning. So today we are talking about reframing, how to reframe what they are, and more importantly, how you can use them in a way that is practical, in a way that can be quite helpful in your day-to-day strategy. And I'll be talking about it from a perspective that's helped me and that's helped my team as well. One of the reasons that reframing, I think, is such an important skill is that it's such a close relation to the idea of insights. We all talk about, how important insights are. And I think reframing is a really key tool in helping us get to insights. But it goes beyond that, because as we'll see later on through this deck, reframes are really about trying to see things in different ways. And that can apply whether you're talking about an insight, whether you're talking about a problem, or really any part of the strategy. Now, what is reframing? The idea of reframing really stems from a simple principle, that changing the way we see things, that changing the angle or the perspective in which we look at a certain thing, changes the way we behave towards it. Now, the perfect example, it's a mix of both psychology and, policy, which are the two sort of sectors that use reframing the most, is an experiment done at Stanford University. Now, respondents were asked to read one of two different essays about high criminal rates. Now, essay number one described crime as a beast that was ravaging a city. So, destroying livelihood. So using a metaphor of a beast or a monster. The second essay described crime as a virus that was infecting the community, describing people as suffering from the virus or living with that virus. And what that experiment found was that the people who'd read the article that used the framing of a beast were more likely to seek out really tough enforcement measures to deal with crime. Whereas the people who had read, the article that compared it to a virus were more likely to seek out, softer, more social measures of dealing with it. And this change in the way people saw something was made through something as simple as a metaphor. And it was behavioral change that most of the respondents didn't realize was happening. And it was something that cut through political lines as well. So both Democrats and Republicans answered fairly similarly. And you see this a lot in policy today. So companies that treat drugs as a criminal issue, for instance, will have very different policies from countries who talk about drugs as a healthcare issue. And we can apply the same things to the work we do in strategy as well. If we can change the perspective or the angle through which our audience sees our brand, it can be a really powerful tool to change their behavior towards it. And we can use this to change the way, we see a problem or the client sees a problem. We can use it to change the way we look at the consumer, so uncovering an insight. And we can use it to change the way consumers see a brand. And that is the sort of 3 types of reframes that we'll be talking about today. So let's start with the business one, which is all about sort of having a really clear understanding of the problem the business faces and what the objective is to figure it out. Now we know that, before we go on to the insights and all the fun, sexy stuff, having that strong foundation is really, really important. But it's not always easy to find. I think we've all experienced examples of clients who weren't sure what their problem was, who kept like leapfrogging from problem to problem, or who just didn't believe they had a problem, like most of my exes. But that's not always the case. And when there is a lack of clarity about a problem, you start struggling to create a solution. So in these issues, when clients don't know what their problem is, sometimes when they're focusing on a basic executional problem, like, oh yeah, let's just launch a random Christmas campaign. Let's do TikTok without a clear problem behind it. Reframing can be a really good way of sort of snapping the client out of their mindset and sort of seeing the problem in a different light. There are 3 ways we can do this, which we'll go through. So showing that your brand strength might actually be a weakness. You could reframe the problem, so show that your client's problem might be completely different if you look at it from a different angle. You can also do the same with the objective. So let's start with the first one, reframing the problem. And this is one of the most famous examples of business reframing. And it's from Harvard Business Review. It's the elevator problem. Now, the premise of this story is that if you're trying to solve a problem of an elevator being too slow, let's say that's the problem. The elevator is too slow. Most people immediately come up with very technical issues. Are there ways we can change the machinery of the elevator to make it faster? Are there ways in which we could adapt, the software behind the elevator to make it faster? Or the doors, for instance. So if you're looking at it from a purely technical angle, from a technical frame, your options are quite limited to technical solutions as well. But if you change the perspective from a technical issue to a personal issue, you start seeing different things. So if you try to think about what the real problem is the real problem that the door elevator is too slow? Is that an inherent problem in itself? Or can you ask, why is it a problem? And when you dig deeper and ask why it's a problem, you realize, well, maybe the elevator being slow is a problem because people are getting bored of waiting. And it's like making it a really shit experience. If you reframe the problem from a technical problem to a personal problem like that, just dig one level deeper, you start coming up with new solutions. So for instance, maybe you don't have to make the elevator faster. Maybe you just need to make the wait less boring. So maybe you could put mirrors inside the elevator. Maybe you could play really interesting music. Maybe you could add, art inside the elevator. So it starts expanding your solution set because you've looked at the problem from a different light, from a technical problem to a personal one. And this can be useful in any case where the problem always seems the same and when the problem always feels very limited. You can always do things like ask, why is this a problem? Is this inherently a problem? Or can we dig deeper and find out, what is it that we really want to solve? And having that question in your mind every time you receive a new brief can be really helpful in reframing in this way. Similarly, related to this is reframing the objective. And this is a real world example called Downtown Dog Rescue. Now, they're a dog rescue facility based in LA. And they started with a simple objective, right? We need to get more dogs adopted. We've got enough dogs in our care. We want to get them adopted. But just like the first example, they realized that by limiting themselves to a very narrow objective, which is let's get the dogs adopted, they were kind of limiting themselves and struggling a little bit. So what they did was they stepped back and asked themselves, what is the ideal world which I want to see? Like, in a perfect world for my brand or for, this charity, what does that look like? And for them, that perfect world was a world where there were no dogs on the street. And when they identified that ideal outcome, they were able to realize that actually, if that's our real objective, then getting dogs adopted is not the only way we can achieve it. We can achieve it not just through cure, which is, getting dogs adopted once they've been abandoned, but also through prevention by stopping dogs from getting abandoned in the first place. So because they clarified what that ideal world is or that ideal outcome, they're able to change their objectives or change their tactics in how they would achieve it. So they started creating classes that help owners care for dogs so that no dog gets put up for adoption in the first place. So reframing the object can be useful in cases where, again, brands have very limited prescriptive objectives or where their real objective is unclear. So you can ask questions like, what do we really want to achieve? Is it, trading consumers up? Is it, increasing frequency or penetration? You could, go bigger. Is it a world where X exists? Or is it a world where we've solved this problem? So sort of identifying that ideal outcome and being hyper clear about it before you even start working on the project is always really, really useful. And lastly, and this is a slightly different one, it's about reframing strengths. And this is quite useful for clients who don't believe they have any problems. So an example here is Nescafe. And for decades, Nescafe had really built a strong association with convenience. They were one of the first companies to pioneer coffee machines, both in offices with Allegria, but also in places like convenience stores. And this was one of their biggest key assets, one of their biggest strengths. But if you look at it from a past perspective, it's a strength. But change the perspective, which is what Nescafe did. They started looking at it from the perspective of what are the trends in the future? What are new consumers looking for? What is a bigger, wider market looking for? And they realized that from that perspective, convenience is not a strength in as much as it could be a weakness, because consumers were starting to seek slower moments, quality drinks. Cafes were really coming into play at the time when this was happening. So they realized that convenience was almost a weakness instead of a strength. And because they'd done that, they looked at it from a different angle. They were able to sort of pivot their brand a fair bit. And if you look at the brand now, they've got Nescafe Gold, which is all about slowing down, all about moments that matter. And even when it comes to Azira, which is another sub-brand, it's all about, finding moments of curiosity and discovery. So because they were able to change the way they saw their strength, see it as a weakness, they were able to expand what they wanted to do, creating new sub-brands and things like that. So you can look at this quite, every day when you're dealing with a client who doesn't believe they have any problems. Look at their strength, what are they proud of? What do they think is their biggest strength? And look at it from different angles. Are there any situations, any contexts where that strength might be a weakness? If you're a really big number one business player, is there a context where being really big and really slow can become a weakness for you? So things like that. Cool. Before we go on to the first exercise, any questions so far? Cool. Amazing.
Sorry, I had a question.
Oh, yes, of course.
So I know we keep talking about, I guess, like singular objectives and singular reframes, but what if you have multiple? I guess if you've got multiple stakeholders that have differing opinions, what's kind of the best way to consolidate those when you're looking at a reframe?
So I think this, the idea of having multiple objectives is a question that goes beyond the idea of reframing, because, you start getting into things like diplomacy and how you want to structure the job. So for instance, sometimes you frame your case in a different way for different people, for instance. So there have been times where I've changed up the strategy narrative when I'm presenting to the brand owner and framed it in a completely different way when I'm talking to the CEO or the category manager. So it helps in understanding sort of where people are coming from, what they're looking for. But when it comes to the actual strategy itself, rather than the narrative dressing around it, I think you can use reframing to identify which of the objectives is the most important. So having an order of the objectives is quite critical. And you can do things, for instance, where a campaign is really designed to hit one objective straight in the head, but in the process manages to hit the other ones, but as a secondary benefit. And I think it's always more important to know the one objective you're trying to solve rather than trying to solve too many at once. And you can, again, do things on a diplomatic scale that can help to deal with different stakeholders.
think that's, yeah, I think you're right. The other point is like, to me, it's a diplomacy thing of like working out who is the key stakeholder and who is, which is the kind of central objective, who's leading the room, you know? And I think, Marco, you were right. It feels like a diplomacy thing that you need to address first, but good.
Sweet. So we're going to have an example, a quick little exercise that I first encountered when I was interning for Procter & Gamble back in the day. So if you've heard this, quiet. It's a very simple problem. It's a historical one. And it's all about NASA. So when NASA started launching space expeditions, so sending people out into space, designing spaceships, they really struggled to find a material for the capsule, which is where the astronauts were inside, that wouldn't burn up as it re-entered the atmosphere. So they tried aluminum, they tried all different types of alloys and metals, but no matter what they did, every time it entered the atmosphere, it couldn't withstand the forces and pressure of friction upon re-entry. So they struggled for that for a long time. They found it really difficult to send anyone up there until they changed the way they thought about the capsule and changed the way they reframed the problem, essentially, in order to solve it. So the exercise is sort of trying to think the way NASA would have thought back then and reframe the problem, reframe the objective, and try to come up with a solution that allows them to still get their capsules up in the air.
1 minute? Is that enough time? I'll do a minute.
Sweet. Should play some music during this.
I know, sorry.
My Spotify Wrapped is horrible, unfortunately. It's literally all Ariana Grande. And if there are any clarifying questions, just ask me as well.
All right. Anyone got any answers or want to go first? I'll give my solution. I was thinking, is the goal is the spaceship going too fast? So would the goal be, how could we slow it up? So when it re-enters, it goes slower.
Fair. Good shot. I won't say until everyone's given their answers, but it's a good shot. Yes.
I'll go. It's not the capsule that needs to re-enter, it's the astronauts.
Okay. Go on. That's really interesting. Yes. Next.
So try 2, capsule in capsule. So the first one burns and the other one keeps the astronaut safe, or to cool the capsule before it hits the atmosphere.
Interesting. Nice. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was more or less the same direction. So put a shield around it that's allowed to burn up.
Nice. Next. Anyone else? Cool. So quite a lot of you got it right, actually. That what they realized was they didn't really need the capsule to survive re-entry. They needed the astronauts to survive re-entry. So you guys were right. They did create a capsule that was designed to burn up upon re-entry, leaving an inner capsule that would protect the astronauts. So great job, guys. Yay, you got it. Bonus points for everyone.
You.
So ready for NASA.
Yeah, sign us up.
Nice. All right, next. So we've talked about reframing the business perspective. Now let's talk about talk about insights. So it's quite useful as an antidote to see consumers in a fresh way, inspire exciting insights, because it is about seeing things from a different perspective, which is what insights are all about. And reframing comes really in handy when you're talking about consumers or a consumer set that's like really heavily stereotyped. So like millennials or moms or things like that. When you're working with an occasion that's always been done the same way, so things like Christmas or Mother's Day or Halloween, or if you're struggling to find like information that's completely new or revelatory to create an insight, again, when you feel like almost everything's been said about the topic, what more can you say? So different things that you could do with reframing is reframe your audience. So can you use a label or a metaphor to see your audience in a different light? Similar to the sort of virus versus beast example we had earlier. Could you reframe the occasion? Try to find a way to flip it and see it in a different light. Or reframe your consumers' motivation. So show that, you know, what consumers' motivations actually are is different from what we think they are. So first example, reframing the audience. And this is for Puma, which is their after hours athlete campaign. So the initial frame is sports brands have always taken inspiration from, you know, Serena Williams, Michael Jordan, these hardcore competitive athletes. And there's only so much you can say about those athletes that hasn't already been said by Nike or Adidas. So Puma was really struggling because they were a sports brand, but the space had been fully used up. So they decided to look at athletes from a different light. Are there people who are athletes in the world that from a different angle, like that we wouldn't consider athletes? So they decided to reframe athleticism from competitive to casual. That maybe you don't need to win. Maybe you don't need to be competitive to be an athlete. What is an athlete really? And when they tried thinking in that direction, they realized that there was a whole score of sports like billiards and ping pong and, you know, going out on the club that people might have overlooked, that Nike and Adidas would never have touched. But if you look at them from a different angle, actually they are athletes. They're moving with their bodies. They're trying out new things. They're pushing themselves. They may not be competing, but they still have that sort of athlete spirit. And because they were able to take an audience and frame them in a new light, so they put that label of an after hours athlete on them, but also reframe the idea of athleticism, what it means, what the definition of an athlete is. That allowed them to really switch things up, find a new audience, but look at the same audience in a different light. So try taking the common stereotypes of your audience. So let's say you're talking about, let's say you're talking about dads, for instance. What are all of the stereotypes about them? How can you flip them? Or let's say you're talking about an aspirational sort of audience. So like athlete or like champion or, you know, trendsetter. Try flipping the stereotypes of those around. Are there things that might fit within this sort of character that we might not have considered in the past? Next, reframing motivations. So this is a really cool example from the UK. And this is Highways England, which is all about preventing road accidents. The planner who did this found out that tailgating, so falling right behind someone, was a major cause of road accidents. Now, what a lot of people would do in that instance is just, you know, run an awareness campaign. Tailgating causes road accidents. But they realized that people didn't really care about the safety issues of tailgating. In fact, they did it quite proudly because they saw that everyone else around them was doing it as well. So they realized that the problem wasn't just a safety issue, but, you know, a social issue. So they had to reframe the motivation from safety to etiquette, this making it a social problem. So what the planner did here, and I think it was Mila McPhee, is she literally sat in the back of a van, in a police van, just watching people tailgate her. And she realized that the closer people were tailgating her, yes, it wasn't safe, but emotionally, socially, she just felt like really weirded out, like really freaked out, like they were invading her personal space. It felt like someone was at a club trying to approach her when she was there to dance on her own. So she realized that she could look at it from a social perspective. And the whole campaign was about, not being a creep, not being a space invader. So they were able to reframe it from a safety issue to a social issue. And they did this as well when it comes to drunk driving. So the idea of having a designated driver, instead of just a blanket safety issue, don't drive while drunk, they made it a social issue. Can we identify someone in your friend group who's a designated driver? And that really became quite a cultural phenomenon as well. So try to think about the lens of people's motivation, and how does that differ from the way your category normally looks at it? Again, when you think cars, you immediately think safety, but they change the motivation to be, is it really safety or is it about society? So start seeing different categories in different ways. So think of beauty. When we think beauty, we always think attraction, society. But could you see beauty are there different motivations in beauty? Is beauty about ambition? Is beauty about safety? How does that change the way your brand could communicate? So think about these like deeper motivations, and have a Rolodex of them even. Like, are there ones which could apply, which I might not have considered? Next is reframing the occasion. And Christmas is the perfect example of this, because there are like 5 million Christmas campaigns. Because it's so important, it's also very cliched. So I don't know if you've seen this one, The Silence the Haters. It's the one where all of the Christmas ornaments start wrapping in grime. So they essentially the campaign was flipping the associations of Christmas, focusing on the fact that for some people, yes, Christmas is about excitement, but for other people, it's a time of worry as well. And in this case, it was worrying that the house wasn't fit for visitors. Another example is the recent Plenty campaign, which is tissue paper, which focused on all of the messes and grossness that happens during Christmas. So similarly to the previous example, it's all about taking the stereotypes about the occasion and flipping them. Are there moments where, Valentine's Day is a day of sorrow, for instance? Are there people for whom Easter means something completely different? So it almost helps to list down every single assumption you have about the occasion and then try to flip it in your head. Sweet. For an exercise, and unlike the past exercise, this one is really just free thinking. There's no right or wrong answer. But let's talk about Mother's Day. It's a stereotyped occasion like Christmas, with an audience that is also very stereotyped as well. So I'll give you guys 2 minutes to have a think about how you could reframe Mother's Day or the audiences involved in it using some of the techniques above. So much less interesting when I'm not the one working on it.
All right. That's
Thumbs
time.
up.
Who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Okay.
Yeah, come on.
I think my first thought was, what about the people who don't have moms, and how
Mhm.
Mother's Day must not be a very good holiday at all. So instead of looking at being like a really kind of exclusive thing to only honor mothers, but kind of honoring yourself and like self-care if there's something around that, or making it really inclusive because at some point we all had a mother, or I think more something like that, depending on like what the actual product or service was. But that's kind of immediately where I went.
Yeah, I love that. Be your own mom this Mother's Day. Yes.
I'll go next. I just kind of straight up flipped it. So it's an opportunity for the family to come together and mothers to appreciate their children.
Yeah. Nice.
I flipped it around the other way. I said it should be the only day of the year where you can tell her what she could do better, and keep your mouth shut for the other 364 days.
True.
I like it. Make it you can't complain except for that one day a year.
No.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that Kraft has done an amazing job 2 years ago. So for Mother's Day, they did the campaign to giving moms as a gift to stop being a mom, to be away for their kids for 2 hours.
Exactly.
So time for themselves. But then I think that another way to rethink of it could be thinking of parenthood and womanhood. So stop with Mother's Day, stop with Father's Day, let's have Parents' Day, or stop Parents' Day and let's have Choice Day.
Nice.
I had, there's like the assumption that you're not, like, the mum's not meant to do anything. Like, you don't do anything. This is your day. Well, what if it's not don't do anything? What if it's the day that they can do everything they want to do? Like, they can do more instead of doing nothing. Do everything you want to do. It's kind of a soft flip, but
No, I like that. I like it. So when I ran this with my team internally, some of the thoughts that came up as well were the idea that Mother's Day isn't a celebration, it's a ceasefire. So taking like all of the arguments you have with your mom around all through the year, and like this is the one moment where like you can have some peace between you. There were some about like the idea of, like it being, I had a strategist in my team who said like it's your chance to build up goodwill for the rest of the year when you don't call your mom. And similar to, I think, one of the ones you guys said, where it's about the idea that moms are always treated like Mother's Day is always treated as being very girly, being very feminine, being very soft and perfect, where it's actually a chance for moms to act like the slob for once. So yeah, really interesting thoughts, guys. And I think like when you guys have longer than 2 minutes on a project, you'll be able to think of like, are there other ways you could flip it? You can flip it, and you guys showed this quite well. You can flip it to reflect things that already exist. So like the idea that, it's a ceasefire, which is something that already exists. It's what people already do or behave. And that's quite a nice straightforward way of creating an insight and launching a campaign. Or you could create a platform in which you actively try to flip something that doesn't exist yet. Some of the ones you guys were saying about, creating a Parents' Day in general. So it's interesting how you can see that reframing and flipping could be used in both those different ways. Nice. Moving on to brand. This is my favorite because you get to have like lots of really fun like ideas here. And it's quite powerful as well because reframing is most effective when your brand is in the shittiest position. So when your brand feels like it's lagging behind its competitors, it's held back by its flaws, reframing acts almost like a bit of a judo flip, so you can make a flaw into a strength. So again, you can show that your brand's weakness is actually its strength. You can show that your brand provides something completely different than what it seems. You can show that your competitor's strength is actually a weakness. And you can show that, your benefit belongs in a completely different category as well. So let's have some examples. Reframing weaknesses. I think everyone has heard of this example before. So this is Avis. I'm not American, despite the accent, so I don't know how to pronounce it. But again, it was lagging behind its bigger, stronger, more powerful rival Hertz. And again, it took its weakness, being number 2, not being the best, and flipped it into a strength. Because we're number 2, we're more desperate, we'll try harder. Because we're smaller, we'll be more dedicated to you. And again, it went from losing 3.2 million to earning 1.2 million. So the idea is look at all your weaknesses and see, like, are there contexts to which, it's a strength? Like, maybe my weakness is that I'm cheap or that I'm sugary. Are there people who want cheap and sugary? Can I talk to those people? So it's really quite powerful when you can look at a really strong weakness and turn it into strength, because a lot of campaigns just try to ignore or cover up the brand's weaknesses. But consumers are always going to have them in mind, right? Like, consumers won't ignore your brand's weaknesses just because you do. But if you can take the weakness and turn it on its head, make it into a strength, there's so much more potential in that to really change the way consumers think about a product. Next, reframing competitors. So McDonald's coffee. And this is almost the flip side of the Nescafe example, where McDonald's has always been about value, about cheapness. But these days, consumers are looking for quality. They're looking for this third wave barista brewed, Arabica coffee. But McDonald's looked at the rest of the category. And, it was tempting to be like, should we talk about how we're made with expert Arabica beans? Should we try to beat them at their own game? And they realized we can't beat them at their own game. But what we can do is point out that the game they're playing is a really shitty, pretentious game. So that's exactly what they did. They ran a whole campaign making fun of how crazy and pretentious this third wave of coffee is, about how weird all these hipster brews were, and just saying, it's great coffee. That's it. We can make it simple. We're not going to try to be anything we're not. Here we are. So taking the benefit of your competitors, which is being crafted and brewed and, really hipster, and turning that into a weakness. And in that way, your weakness, which is being value, doesn't seem like a weakness anymore. So it helps to look at the conventions of the category. How do they communicate? What do they talk? What do they look like? How do they show consumers? Again, list out all of those stereotypes and be like, are there any of these that, if you look at it, are actually kind of shit or actually could be a weakness? And then challenge it, and then flip it, and then show where your brand sort of comes in. Next is reframing product. And this is the AA, which is essentially it's insurance, it's breakdown coverage for cars. It's a necessary evil. Nobody really wants it. Nobody really cares about it. But what they did was they did a survey of the members who use AA the most. And for them, insurance wasn't a necessary evil. They saw it as an emergency service, because when you need it most, when your car literally breaks down on the road, it is just like police. It is just like a fire rescue. It is an emergency service. So they adapted the core line of calling it the fourth emergency service. So, police, fire rescue, and then them. Reframing it from a necessary evil, from sort of a business, from a corporation, to seeming like a social good. Instead of something that you have to choose to call, instead it's something that is provided for you as a benefit, almost. And they were so successful that they were charged on this tagline that they weren't allowed to use it. So they had to add, to our members, we're the fourth emergency service, because the police and the fire rescue service got really, really jealous. So it's worth looking at how your key audience sees your brand. Are there different jobs or benefits that the product provides for them that go beyond the standard or go beyond the stereotypical benefit? Does it solve a deeper role? And another example of this is IKEA's sleep campaign. And, they told the story of the turtle and the hare. Yeah, I think it is the turtle in the hair. But the twist of the story is that the turtle had slept on an IKEA bed, and thus he'd woke up more rested. So instead of just saying, "Oh yeah, we make nice cheap furniture," they went one step further and like, what does that do for you? What does that actually provide you? Next, and this is another exciting one, is reframing the competitor set. So this is a product called Seedlip. And if you look at it on its own, it is a sweet, fruity drink. So it's in the UK, it's essentially like a cordial, like a squash, almost like a light fruit drink, essentially. But what they did was they didn't say, oh yeah, we're gonna compare it against other cordials, we're gonna compare it against other squashes. They said, we're gonna compare it against like gins and spirits. We're going to call this a non-alcoholic spirit. And they changed the competitor set from like a low price product to a high price product. It's exactly a non alcoholic gin, and that immediately raised its price by almost £10 per 750 ml. So it hadn't just reframed its category, like, okay, we're not in this category or another category, but it created a new category as well of non-alcoholic gins. And it tapped a new occasion, it tapped a new audience in the process. And there are lots of examples of brands that do this as well, where they, there are brands that shift themselves from being, I think, from a snack to a cake, or from a yogurt to a milk. And if you're really struggling in one category, maybe you could reframe yourself as moving into a different category. And here is where an example, of a label comes in handy. Like talking about a non-alcoholic spirit immediately changes the way you see something. Calling yourself a craft beer versus like small independent beer immediately changed the way people saw them and created a new category. And, again, we talked about this with After Hours Athletes. Names can really change the way people see things. The Chilean sea bass would not be as popular if people called it by its biological name, which is the Patagonian toothfish. It's just a lot less sexy. And I think the kiwi fruit, it's nice, it's cute. The real name for it was, I think, the Chinese gooseberry. So a little less sexy than like cute fuzzy kiwi. So again, understanding the label of the category it's in, but also understanding who you're competing against can be really, really useful. And there's lots of examples out there if you can Google it. So exercise, another one like the last one, trying to reframe a brand. So pot noodle, it's like just shitty, cheap instant ramen. They've already, tried to embrace that. So they've already done a bit of reframing to themselves, just embracing the fact that they're the slag of all snacks. But I want us to try and think of other ways of reframing it. How could you reframe pot noodle to get people to see it in a different light? To make it more appealing despite it being cheap and salty. I'll give you all 2 minutes. Is it worth playing music?
Sorry, I have a question. How do they look like? Do they look like noodles, like pasta? So do you need fork or something on your head to have it, or you just drink it from the cup?
You need a fork. So inside the pot, it's all that instant ramen, and then you just pour water into it, and then you just scoop it out with a fork.
Okay.
All right, it's time.
Sweet. Who'd like to go first?
I'll go. So I kind of thought about flipping it again with reframing the weakness as a strength, the fact that it's like cheap and salty and convenient. Like you can kind of make it like an accessory for people that are busy, or you could do like a lifestyle guide where it's kind of like an accessory to have, like when you're on the go. Like you can do like the actual like upscaling it as well. So say you needed like soy sauce and just like a couple of basic things to elevate the experience. You're kind of elevating your life with it because you're busy. It's something that's easy to grab and go and something of that nature.
Nice.
I'm going to piggyback off that because I just had a thought as you finished there. I was like, life's really good if you're having pot noodles because you're like, life's so busy. It's like when life's so exciting, you got to have pot noodles. Like there's something else that's kind of dragging you somewhere. And then the other one I had was when your food disappoints you. So the thing about pot noodles is you'll never be disappointed because you know exactly what you're getting.
Mm-hmm.
You're never spending too much time on them. So if you try to go fancy and try to like cook yourself a nice meal, you'll probably burn your steak and then have a disappointing meal because you've like, I put all this effort in. You put zero effort in, the bar's like low. It's down there. So I was like, you're always going to...
It'll never be the best, but it will never fail you either.
You'll never be disappointed. Always exceed expectations.
So I'll go next. And I thought of, to me, they are like the cheap, almost unedible version of pasta. But then it becomes a luxurious meal when you are camping. So something like for food for urban nature lovers. It gives you space for the imagination. So the truth is that you are having it because you don't have time to cook or you don't want to go and buy some groceries. But if you think of yourself maybe under a sky full of stars, you might appreciate it. And it doesn't sound so cheap. It sounds like luxury.
I love it. It's almost like you focus less on the food because you shouldn't focus on food anyway. Like, why is everyone trying to get you to obsess about food when like there's so much else out there? And I think the pot noodle's perfect for that because it's like you eat it and then you can get back to like looking at the great outdoors.
Yeah. I was thinking about framing it as a lifesaver. It doesn't matter whether you're very hungry or whether you're very down on energy or you need some more salt. This is the lifesaver because it will last forever. It will never spoil. So it's just the thing that you have to have in your home as your ultimate lifesaver.
Yeah, I love that, having it as part of your emergency kit.
Yeah, absolutely.
The way I reframed it was that it's not anything fancy, but it's a very old meal. So people have been relying it to get through the years for thousands of years. So it's the original power meal, or it's been helping fight battles for 2,000 years. It's that kind of meal you can always rely on. It's simple, but it's easy and cheap. And yeah.
I love that. Really, really great examples. When I ran this with my team, some of the examples that came up were, it might be a shit final meal, but it's a great ingredient. So the idea that you can use it to upscale, and a lot of people can make really amazing things starting from a pot noodle. It's a really great starting base ingredient. We also had the idea that like pot noodle is always meant to like copy sort of ramen and Chinese things. So it's like, is there something about like the most British Asian food that you could get? Like ramen, Asian food that tastes like home. It's sort of tapping into the fact that it's part of culture as well. So yeah, like lots of really interesting stuff, guys. And I think you can immediately see like so many different campaigns and so many different directions you could go just based on like a 2-minute example of examining the stereotypes behind the brand and seeing where you could take them. And we've got things like occasion, we've got things like like purpose and like an ATL campaign. You've got things like, usage scenarios. So I think it's really a testament to the power of reframing to unlock lots of different opportunities where there otherwise might not have been. And I think that's it from my section. I think Julian had this slide that you wanted to go through as well.
Now, it was just a recap of the three areas that you had kind of talked about of the business, consumer, and brand levels that we had kind of gone through. But I think it's so interesting because we just forget to do it, like reframes, or like since I kind of was introduced to reframes, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then I forget to do it. And then I do it tonight. And I'm like, why don't I do this on every single brief? Like, I've been stuck on some problems. And while we're in this, I was like writing down some things because I was thinking about reframing. So it was really good. I think it's those questions, those prompts that you kind of need are really good as well. Like what are the questions you need to ask yourself? But they're great. I guess questions. Does anyone have any questions on this or other thoughts on reframes? Yep.
I have a question. Can we, to make it easier to remind ourselves to think of reframes at every brief, as Julian said, can we think of reframing as the flipping mechanism of insight, but applicable to every element of the strategy scenario, from the product to the communication need if you're dealing with a campaign?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I like to think of it. Every time I think of reframing, I always like to think of it as almost a judo flip, where you see things in a different way or you question the assumptions. So the idea of like listing down everything I think I know and then flipping it is what I try to do every time I start a new job. Like, I'll list down everything that I think across the board, from product to consumer to problem. So yeah, I think ultimately things like this and any skill that I like practicing in strategy, you adapt it to what works for you. So if it helps you to think of it as flipping, and if that gets you to use it more often, then I would absolutely suggest that's the way to go.
Okay, so basically an insight on steroids.
Yeah, I love that.
So strategists are reframers. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I had an exercise that I used to do, which is very similar. I think I've got a thing in the academy. There's a video of like 10-minute insight trick, which was you'd write out all the common cliches of a category or a product, and then you just you'd try to reverse and flip the words in the cliche. And it was so surprising. Like, you'd get to really interesting statements really fast. So it is really good. It works. It can work so fast, reframes too. Like, even this 2 minutes, these 2-minute exercises, you're like, wow, you're getting to so much work. So it was good.
Yeah, and I love what you said about strategists being reframers, because so many times, like clients will have the research, clients will have the information, clients will have a lot of the ability to get the raw information they need. But where we come in, and our role is taking all of that and seeing it in a different light. And that ultimately is at the core of reframing, and also at the core of what we do as strategists.